Okay, so does anyone have anything they'd like to share this morning or ask any questions?
Yes, I want to share something. Thank you so much for you had us today in the application. Feel the gates, the shoulders and the hips, and connecting those with the partner, the opponent, and also connecting our dantian to theirs. And it was super helpful. And it was really cool. I had an experience where in the application, I would find my body moving, and I didn't know why I was moving, because it didn't seem like it was related to what they were doing. But then a moment later, they would move, and I would see that my body had responded to the direction they were going to go before they moved, and it felt like the body was connected with their body and the impulse before the actual movement happened. And I've had this experience before, but not very often. And it felt like it was the clearest it had been. It felt like really consistent. And it gave me a lot more kind of clarity as to, in Tai Chi, when it says, when the opponent doesn't move, I don't move. And when they move, I'm already there. I guess, yeah, that became a lot more clear. It kind of felt like something you had to do before. Not that that's what the teachings say, but it felt more like, oh, this is just when you're connected. This is just a natural experience that you have. And then when we came back, before we resumed class, when I was practicing, I was like, oh, I still want to have this experience. So I basically felt myself in front of myself and connected with my own gates. And I found I had the same experience, and it was the form felt a lot better than it does naturally, because I felt like I was still having that same experience. And then when we did the form together with you at the end, it also felt a lot better. And then I found that I was moving faster than you were moving. I was ahead. So I just relaxed and slowed down a little bit. And then it felt like it naturally synced up with you. And it just felt a lot more natural. The movement felt a lot more natural and connected. And it also gave me, I felt like I could understand you better, because I know you'd mentioned in the past that you thought that your reflexes were really slow, but you actually found that you're actually moving ahead of the person. And I never really understood that kind of experientially. But I through that experience, I could see how, that would be happening. So anyway, that was just a really kind of rich experience. I wanted to share that, and thank you for having us do that.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad. I was like, yeah, it's good experience actually. It's I feel that when we're present, it sounds like the kind of experience that you had sounds like really special, right? And it kind of is, but it's the experience of what people call attunement. It was kind of interesting because I was reading about, and I think studying something that's called rapport, and nowadays they call it attunement. It's kind of really interesting because the description for it is actually the same. And it's the experience where you're having a good time with a friend, and you're talking and you're finishing each other's sentences, and you're and whether you realize this or not, actually you're moving at the same time, and your movements are actually synchronized. They're moving at the same time, you're raising your hands around the same time, and you're kind of clapping at the same time, or your movements are in rhythm. And if you look at it when you first study it, they say that you should kind of mimic or mirror what the other person's doing. When they kind of lean forward, you lean forward, and it's kind of helpful. But when you actually do that, it can be really annoying, especially if the other person notices that you're actually mirroring them. So that actually doesn't do it. But as you've noticed, when you actually just calm and when you relax and when you feel, then you can actually feel the other person. You can feel their instincts. What you're doing is you're feeling their energy moving through the body, and it's what we call instincts. We call instinct is actually how the energy flows through the person's body, and we're just picking up the energy, and as you said, like when you first do that, you don't know necessarily how to sync up with that, and so you tend to like when you're not relaxed, instead of following them, you you can actually end up moving before, and you can have those things, but that it's like that's the experience of syncing up. But the more you do that, the more you start being able to actually have this experience of being attuned to the other person. And it's not a perfect solution for everything, but if the other person wants to be attuned as well, it can really help. It can really make a significant difference in your experience with the other person. And the better you get, I find that it really helps just across the board. And so it's like, I find that not the martial application, but the everyday application of it to be even more profound and even more helpful.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I like the context that you're giving. And I'm finding that actually, even just while we're talking, as I'm having the same experience, it's helping me feel like I'm able to receive what you're saying better than I normally can.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think that's like the really powerful thing about the teaching is that what's true in one area, is true in all areas. It's a universal truth. And instead of actually being limited, like, oh, this is like, if I learn this, then I'll get better at doing this. But actually, when you get better at doing this, then you get better at all those things that are related to it. And so it's not compartmentalized. It's kind of like, I think the power is it's generalized. And so, or I should say, we're working on things that actually have a general, it's very specific, but we're working on things that have a very general impact. It's probably better to say. Like if you work on speed and you get faster, then anything to do with speed, you do better. And so it's the same thing, like you're increasing some things, like you're increasing your natural attunement. And so since you're increasing your natural attunement, anything to do with attunement, even whether you realize this or not, you just get better at it. It's actually one of the reasons why I feel like when you practice something like Tai Chi, your general quality of life goes up, because it goes up in these small ways that actually raises the quality of your life through the whole day. So like, if, for instance, if you work on the quality of your attention, that's your mind. And if you work on the quality of your mind, then that's your entire experience. And so, and that's like how you experience and have access to more and more of your bliss, where you start learning how to have more and more access to that versus actually living a life. I feel like the main thing is that we all want to have a good life, and the way we try and have a good life is by having a life that has less problems. We think in terms of having a life that has less problems. And I don't think most people realize that we're trying to have a life that has less problems, instead of actually having a life where you have more of the things that you want. And that's actually oftentimes easier to hit than having a life that has no problems, because having a life that has no problems is kind of like saying you want to have a life that's perfect, whatever that means. But that means that everything in your life has to flow well. But instead of having a target like that, actually having very specific targets that increases, the quality of your life, like such as, if your attention becomes better, the quality of your attention becomes better, well, that affects everything, right? Because it's like, it's not like you can get away from your attention. If the quality of your awareness gets better, it's not like you can get away from the quality of your awareness. And so I feel like kind of like understanding Tai Chi from this perspective is really powerful, because I have seen people where they practice this, but this aspect of Tai Chi is not very emphasized. So like they're good when it comes to doing Tai Chi, but then they don't realize it carries over, or they don't carry it over into other areas of their life. And so it gets compartmentalized into just when they do Tai Chi. And I feel that that's kind of a waste of effort in some ways, because you're not getting, the benefit that you could be by practicing something that can really have a universal effect. So I appreciated you just making that additional comment.
Thank you, Master Kim. I'd say it's a pretty good deal we have here.
Yeah, that is a pretty good deal. Okay, very good. Okay, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Okay. So anyone else would like to share anything or comment on anything?
Hello?
Hello? Yes.
Yeah, this was a really interesting discussion. Thank you for the observations so far. I had a interesting experience. It was like not what you think of as a positive experience in training, because something hit me, kind of emotionally in the middle of the series. And then when I was training with my partner, I think some of what may have happened is I was not able to attune very well because of that. And so it's like there was an application that I remember doing and not having any problem with the person before. I feel like I understand it. There's something misaligned, and I'll have to check with them, later. But I'm kind of suspecting that when something like this happens, where you're in a state where there's like, I guess to put it in a really like neutral way, there's too much energy to process, or there's too much information to process already, and then you come with the other person, it's more challenging. And so I guess I just wanted to share that, because I think even in these experiences that aren't so great, there's something really to be learned about the principles. And so I don't know if that is like, if you have other things you want to say about that, and it may not be specific enough to speak to, but that was my experience today.
Oh, no, I think that's actually good. I mean, it's like general enough, it's specific enough. So I think I can definitely speak to that. I think what you're saying is definitely true. I think that, like one of the issues with attunement is you can look at attunement from a perspective of information exchange. And so it's like a higher way of information exchange. So it's like you open yourself up so that, you have a more direct connection to the other person. And so, so it's an information highway. Attunement is when two people are exchanging information, in some ways at the highest level, or pretty close to the highest level. It's like a degree, almost like a degree. of how attuned you are. So, you're exchanging information at the highest level possible. And, it's like, that's why you feel emotionally connected and things like that. But if, let's say, for instance, you're not doing so good, and then the other person, let's say, for instance, is not feeling good either, and you open up, then that, if you weren't ready for that, then that can be difficult. Because you're either getting too much information, or you're getting information you weren't ready for, or you're getting information that you weren't expecting. And
yeah. It feels
right?
like a hazard. It feels like I guess I realize why I shut down too if I'm emotional, is that it's like you can tell that has an impact on the interaction.
Yes,
But then
yes,
if
yes.
you don't open up, it also has an impact. And so you're kind of like, what do you do?
You're doomed if you do, and if you don't, right? And so, the way you deal with it is actually always the same, in one sense, as in, like, there's no method, but it's really a matter of being, which is to let things be. And so what I'd like to say is that to actually meet it with calmness, where, it's kind of like when you're having a reaction, kind of look where the reaction was coming from, and you'll notice that the moment you look at where it was coming from, you are automatically in third eye, and you're not thinking, and you're just experiencing. And a certain kind of calm that comes from that. So when you are just, when you don't think, so when you think, you're filtering the experience from your thoughts, and typically the thoughts are resisting the moment. That's why you're having the thoughts. You're having some kind of belief, or you're resisting the moment. And so it's being filtered through that. So you can't actually really relax, if you will. That's the issue. You can't relax in the moment. You have to be able to get yourself to a place where you can observe, without evaluating. Because evaluating means that you're judging. And if you're judging, that means that it implies confirmation bias. And if you have confirmation bias, that means that you're in scarcity. And that means that automatically you're not seeing the whole reality. It means that you're seeing it by a certain criterion. And, sometimes the criterion can be correct, but, when we're having an issue, oftentimes actually that's not correct. But more importantly, the experience of it is that of resistance. And since the experience is that of resistance, it makes it more difficult and necessary. And so the key is to not resist that experience. And so the question becomes, well, how do you do that? And, the simple thing you can say is to feel, but then, how do you feel becomes a question, because, and, because like, it's kind of interesting, like most of the time when we think we're feeling, we're actually not feeling, because the reason we know we're not feeling is because it's kind of interesting, like when you really feel, there's this feeling of letting go. So let's say, for instance, like you're resisting something, and your friend's telling you something, you're having a an altercation, and you're talking to them, and at some point, you realize you're not listening, and you decide that you're going to really listen. So you focus in, and then as you start hearing what they're saying, you start feeling your heart melting away, and then all of a sudden you realize you haven't been listening. And so that's kind of like the experience. So most of the time when we think we're listening, we're actually not listening, we're actually resisting, and we don't even know that we're actually resisting. And so all these arts are kind of like, it's actually helping a person fine tune to the experience of listening so that you're more familiar with what listening is actually like. And it's actually probably a better, so it's a kind of like you're getting better and more familiar with with attunement. And so it's a process of becoming more and more attuned so that you resist that process less, because to be attuned to someone is rather vulnerable. That's when it's wonderful, but to open yourself up comes with a risk. When it's wonderful, but then when it's not, it feels really vulnerable. And that's one of the reasons why earlier when I was talking, when I was answering the previous question, I was saying that the issue is that we try and live a life where we don't have any problems. This is actually what I was talking about. We try and live a life where we don't have these experiences where we opened up vulnerably, and then it became really difficult experience, and we don't think about it, but the reason it's such a difficult experience is because we don't know how to handle our own emotions. We don't know how to handle our own turbulence. The other person's turbulence is actually not the issue. We don't think in those terms, but because we think in terms of, oh, that's the other person's issue. But if you open up and the other person's turbulence comes in, but you're actually more familiar and comfortable. And when I say comfortable, I don't mean like it's like such a welcome experience, but meaning as in like sometimes it's kind of interesting, like when you're at your work or your job, sometimes some things just happen, but you've done it so many times, that that's what you to expect. It's not a big deal. And maybe the novice who's not used to it is resisting it, but you just go and just take care of it, because that's just part of the deal. It's maybe not pleasant, but you just take care of it, and it's just part of the deal. And maybe if you've been doing it long enough, maybe it's a chore for some other people, but you also realize that that actually that's where the greatest opportunities can be, and also sometimes the greatest joys can be. And so like there's like no resistance. And so when I say comfort, I want to make sure it's not understood in terms of pleasure or that it's easy. Some things can just be more inherently difficult. It's just you relax through it, right? So I want to just make sure that when I say yeah. So if a person starts having more comfort with their own emotions, with their own turbulent emotions, then other people's turbulent emotions becomes a lot less threatening or scarier. And I feel like that's actually where the key is, actually learning how to manage your own emotions, because and understanding that's actually really what you're managing. Because when you're with someone else, the interactions can genuinely be a difficult interaction, but I feel like it becomes even more difficult because we don't know how to manage our own emotions. And so we don't realize that the reason we resist it is because we find it so difficult to feel those feelings when they come into a system. And so that's why we resist it so much. But then once we learn how to do it, then our attention goes to handling it versus resisting it, because we know what to do, right? It's just where the attention goes. Like, it's just what our system does. If we know how to handle something, then our attention goes to handling it versus resisting it. That only happens when our system doesn't know how to handle something very well. And so going back to this, so how do you do that is actually in that moment, whatever pain that you're experiencing, kind of just ask yourself, oh, who is the one that is looking at this experience? Where is the experience coming from? And the moment you ask yourself that question, you'll actually go kind of blank. And the reason is because, see, before there was an observer and observee, something that there was a subject and an object. There was someone who was observing, and there was something or someone that was being observed. And it's really interesting because that connotates a division. So the brain, when you're looking at a vista, you don't go, oh, I'm over here, and you don't analyze the vista, you just take it in. There's no resistance. But when you have a problem, all of a sudden we split into subject and object, meaning as in here, I am the person who's having the problem, and here, this thing is outside of me, that is the problem. And that division is the beginning of resistance. And so by just eliminating that and then being present with the experience, you start having insights because you start really being present with it without being divided. And so I'd like to actually just say, try that and then see what happens the next time that happens. And you'll have insight about what's going on inside of you and actually what's going on with the other person. But most importantly, you'll be present enough with what's going on so that you're actually not becoming distracted with the inner contents of it, but you're actually flowing with what is actually going on. And so instead of actually getting caught up in the interpretation of what's going on, you're able to actually just handle what's going on. And then that gives insight as to what's really going on later, oftentimes after the emergency is over, because the kind of description that you're talking about, you could connotate as an emergency as in, it's something is happening right now and it's not exactly you can explore it in that moment. So you just have to handle what is going on in that moment. And, what I just talked about, actually being in the present where there's no observer and observee actually will allow you to do that and take that in instead of actually getting derailed in the separation and wondering, things such as, why am I like this? Or why is the other person like this? Because as we already know, those kind of thoughts don't help us one bit. So, okay, was it clear?
Right. Yeah, that was super clear. Thank you. I can feel it's starting to flow.
Yeah.
It's just difficult. It's like, I don't know, it's like not wanting to cry, not wanting to lose that kind of visual of composure, but I can see that that's part of the issue, and the oneness, or the lack of division that you talked about with the observer and the observee. I think it will help.
Yeah.
And I just realizing, like what you said about when it's great, when you can attune and you feel that pleasure in it. It's wonderful, but it really isn't always like that at all.
No, not at all.
Holy cow. And I feel like there's part of me that's what I'm looking for. And so when it's not, it's being able
terrible.
to just being able to be okay with that and observe it long enough where whatever is supposed to be revealed through that is clear.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I have this idea or this picture that it looks a certain way, that super highway of pleasurable interaction.
Yeah.
I like, no, that's actually, if you have that as the starting point, then it's not going to work, you know?
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, like, right. And that is exactly the issue. Like the picture of how it's supposed to be, it's like, yeah, I think when you learn attunement, it's like people don't realize this is a non-dual practice, meaning as in, we don't prioritize pleasure over pain. We say that life is a balance between pain and pleasure, and that it's like, and they're both necessary components of life. And so, you know, most people don't, and I think you're right. I think actually when people learn these things, people learn it with the expectation of somehow solving the problem of ever having a bad experience, instead of actually realizing that you're learning in part also how to have a good bad experience. And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's like I have terrible times. Like, it's like I have terrible experiences, but I feel like like I feel like I have more peace with myself having those experiences, because I'm able to, relax and resist less and be more authentic. Um, like meaning as in like be honest with my system can handle and what I can do and what I can't do, and honestly communicate that with people. And that's actually really what really happens when you're present. But I think that people look at this as a solution that will make things always work without any pain. And it's actually not the case. If anything, it makes apparent the pain even more apparent because you're not resisting it. You're not numbing yourself out. It's a practice that allows you to be more human, not less. It's a practice that allows you to become even more aware of your foibles, instead of not. And that's why in the Tao Te Ching, it talks about that, if the master is uncertain, the master is full of doubt, the master, it's like doesn't paint a picture of someone who is like confident and never is fallible, but actually it paints the exact opposite picture. And it really confuses people because it's kind of like people are like, oh, well, if that's the case, why are we even practicing this? Like, am I not practicing this to
Right.
right? Yeah. Am I not practicing this to make my life better? And I don't think people understand that actually practicing something to have a better worst case scenario, is actually a great practice. It does make your life better. To practice something to not try and make things work or for performance, but to be more authentic. People don't realize that actually is what creates an authentic life. And an authentic life is where you can be honest with your limitations and with who you are. And that actually looks a lot more humbling than what people think. And so I think that because of that, it's kind of like social thing. So, but one thing I did want to say, I do need to get going here and start closing this here. So I said wrapping this up. But one thing I want to say is that maybe when you're, wanting to have tears, maybe they're not just your tears. Maybe you're shedding tears for the other person when the other person couldn't. Maybe like earlier,
Yeah.
when Shifu Noihas was talking, he said that he moved before. Maybe your tears are moving before the other person.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Because I know I tend to take it like, oh, this is my stuff, but you don't really know,
Yeah,
where it's coming from.
Yeah, you don't really know where it's coming from. And actually, that's really well said. And, it's oftentimes not clear until the tears have been shed. And, because we're so outcome focused instead of, being, I think nowadays, what people say is process focused or journey focused. And I think that's actually good. But I think if you divide the outcome and the journey, or any of that, I think that that's erroneous. I feel that that creates an issue by in itself. There is no distinction. I mean, like, how can there be a beginning? How can there be, a middle? How can there be an end? It's a continuous oneness. So to say process focused, well, there's an outcome right now. And then, in this moment, there's an outcome and a beginning at the same time, right? And so to just even make that distinction is erroneous, I would say. And so it's a kind of like a distinction that the mind is creating to have a little bit more control. And then you have to arbitrarily identify, okay, this is the beginning, this is the middle or the process, and then this is the outcome that we should have. And these are all controls, right? And so as you said, like, where does one begin and where the other person, end? And we're trying to know the outcome before we let ourselves. Isn't that interesting? We feel so unsafe about just being ourselves that we try and know the outcome. And that's kind of like, in some ways what's happening. Before you let yourself cry, you want to know why. Is this mine? Because if it is mine, then maybe it's too embarrassing, and then maybe I shouldn't cry. But maybe if it's the other person's fault, then maybe I can feel a little better about myself. And those are really vulnerable experiences. They're really vulnerable experiences, but oftentimes until you cry, you don't even know whose is what. And once you cry and you let yourself, it comes. So
yeah, it's definitely, I see where my interpretation of the whole thing is actually causing resistance, because there's something about this feeling that feels very threatening, like I'm about to lose face or lose position, or something it means about me, rather than just experiencing it and then seeing what it actually has to show.
Yeah. That was really well said. And so anyway, so I suggest that the next time you experience something like that, allow yourself to just go into this place where you're not separated out between your subject and your object, and then allow yourself to see what comes out of it. And by not dividing that out, and not resisting, the experience will allow you to actually see what it is you need to know. And as you know, I like to say, as you have a better relationship, kind of what you just talked about, like, having, not losing respect, or another way to say, to gain respect. Ironically, we respect people who are inherently themselves. We respect people who, can actually say, oh yeah, I'm not able to do that. Like, that's actually my limit. We actually respect those people, because it takes a certain kind of courage to be able to admit your limitations. And so we respect people who are authentic, but we don't realize that because we're so afraid, and we see those people who are actually very clear about their limitations as capable people, ironically, because they come across as capable, and we don't realize that actually what makes them capable is actually them being clear about and authentic about, where their limitations are and who they are. It's kind of one package, and your respect ironically goes up with that, actually, instead of dropping. And so I wanted to just say that, that probably is not going to help, but I just want to say that because I feel like as you allow yourself to come into this place where you're allowing your subject and your object to become one, and move from this place where there's no division between the observer and the observee, I feel that you'll find this more and more.
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, I am running really late, so I gotta run. But thank you for the discussion. This was really great. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate you actually bringing this up. It was really powerful.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kim.
You're welcome. Okay, everyone, you all have a day of oneness, and yeah, have a great day of cultivation. Thank you for listening in.
Thank you so much, Master Kim.
Thank you,
You're
Master
welcome.
Kim.
You're welcome.